Good morning, everybody, and welcome, welcome, welcome. In the words of country singer Emmylou Harris, together again, my tears can't stop falling. So I'm so grateful to all of you for putting up with all of these restrictions and masks and temperature checks and everything that we have to do to be together in this room and to be together too with all of our friends at home who we also welcome today. And none of this would be possible without the Cracker Jack team upstairs at the Royal Geographical Society that usually keep me in order. But today, obviously, I'm very flummoxed, so excuse me. But what a treat to celebrate a royal birthday and to do so with a man in uniform. Ladies, is there anything better than that? No. So we want to welcome some guests today. One from KCWC, Linda Minter. And then we have many guests who are here thanks to our speaker, John Barber. We want to welcome John Nolan, Esme Faye, Roger Carver, and if I've forgotten anyone, please forgive me, but it's been a very long night. But before we get to the main program and recognizing the board members that are here, we want to go through some of these housekeeping issues, which are that there is a one-way system operating in the auditorium. So you came in this way, we will be asking you to exit that way, and we will give you instructions for that. You should remain masked at all times. Try not to mingle. And sanitizers are around and about. And if we could ask you to remain in your seat throughout the meeting with your mask on, we appreciate it. When we get to the question and answer period, we will ask you to stand and raise your hand. We cannot pass around a microphone. So we'll ask you please to stand up, say your question. I will repeat it to the in-home viewing audience. I've always wanted to say that. And then we will be able to handle it that way. So I'm sorry that we can't do our usual system, but I'm sure you understand. And when we are ready to exit, you'll be directed to exit a row at a time through that door. And those of you who are going to the lunch will be directed by Julie Ferrero, who'll be waiting for you there to go to Agnisco. So now, I am not a fan of long pre-meeting announcements because it just takes time away from our speaker, and that's really what we're here to see. But since this is the first time that we've been able to be together, I asked the board, or as many of them who could come, to be with us today, and I wanted to recognize them because you should all know who they are. And none of this would be possible without them. So, could I ask the board members to stand? Teresa Clausen, who is the former president of KCWC and currently the vice president. Caroline Gervais, treasurer. Mary Sini, secretary. Vivian Matthews, marketing and programs. Ann Kutstabaloulis, events, and former chair of the nominating committee. Maria Palejo in membership. Is Maria still outside? I think she may still be diligently working outside. And those who are missing today, Elisabetta Astolfi, who do our member benefits, Philippa Koppelston, who is the activity leader liaison, and Karen Gustovich, who remains as e-communications leader. So I'm going to give these ladies a round of applause. So now, the other announcement I'm going to make is about Volunteers for Charity. It really saddens me that we have been trying to find a volunteer to take charge of this activity area. And in the fossilized age, when I was last president of KCWC, we not only had a volunteer activity for charity, but we used to sponsor a charity, and we would pick one every 3 years and raise money for that cause. We've had to suspend that because of the change of bookkeeping and Companies House and all of these rules, but that doesn't mean that we can't still, as a group, recognize the community in which we live, and today especially in front of a man who is devoted to service and whose whole life has been service. It's really sad that we can't find someone to step up and help everyone in the community understand that we aren't just ladies who lunch, in the words of Stephen Sondheim. So I am going to go home and look in my email box all summer long, and I know no one's going to disappoint me. One of you kind ladies is going to come in and is going to tell me that you would like to help either read to the blind or make a phone call to the elderly and the isolated or stuff a Christmas basket. It's who we are and who, if we are not now, who we need to be. So I have faith in this membership, and I know you're going to come forth. Now, to the main event. John Barber really needs no introduction. As I always say, I have yet to meet someone who doesn't already know who he is. He is, I'm fond of saying he has a Rolodex of contacts the length of the Book of Kells, which is appropriate because he has a home in Ireland that he loves. He answered my call today to celebrate all things royal when unfortunately our speaker canceled. And I should have thought of John originally because I can't think of anyone who's more in tune with the backstory of what it takes to put on these royal engagements. He is fabulous in knowing the ins and outs. He's here sweltering in his uniform, and I'm hoping that I can get him to reveal a little gossip too. He is devoted to service, having chaired many charities. He is a freeman of the City of London, a liveryman of his guild, but above all, he is just about the kindest man I know, with one notable exception, and that is my own dedicated, devoted husband, who, when I have been alone in this auditorium, has been there with questions. And so, John, you get a special recognition because just like St. Peter knows, when my husband gets to Heaven's Gate, St. Peter is going to say to him, "You were married to her, take the easy pass lane straight in." So, John Barber, take it away. We have the sword nearby, which we are keeping in case any beheadings are required and people do not follow the rules. And I know you're not going to disappoint, so John Barber, please welcome John Barber.
Well, after an introduction like that, what can you say?
That's right.
Mary is very modest because she's always very good and doing everything for everybody else, as we all know. Mary and I know each other through something called the Irish Georgians, and we do an event every year which involves her wonderful car that her and her husband have. And she's always enjoyed having us in the car because she gets the gossip of what's going on. Every bit of gossip, normally. If I explain what my role is, the Queen appoints a Lord Lieutenant for Greater London and for every shire, so Essex, Suffolk, and so on like that, have a Lord Lieutenant. London's unusual because you have to work out that the size of London is so large that in 1951 it was decided that they had to have people to represent different areas of London. So Kensington and Chelsea, for argument's sake, currently has Elizabeth Arnold, who did the role previously. Normally you retire at 75, but she decided to retire a little bit earlier, but has gone back in to do the role. But we have a number of ladies which we never used to have before. But the difference is that I look after an area which has got 350,000 people in it, which is equivalent size to somewhere like Rutland or that sort of area. But Kensington and Chelsea has 156,000, so they've got a very tiny proportion. I have something which is called, I'm a Rep DL, so I'm a Representative Deputy Lieutenant. Initially, you start off by being a Deputy Lieutenant, and on day one when you're appointed, you're asked how active you want to be. I said I was prepared to be fairly active, but you have to learn basically a lot of protocol before you even commence. One of the things is that you have to make sure your vocabulary, so when you're introducing a role, you don't introduce them, you have to say, "May I please present to you?" You can only do things in a certain sort of form. So normally, before you take the role of being a representative deputy lieutenant, you get a period of training. So you will go and attend somebody more senior, and I'm now I've got another 18 months of doing my role, because at 75 you stop, and in 18 months' time I'm 75. I now have people who shadow me to ask how to deal with things, which becomes quite interesting. So you gradually learn. And one of the things is when you commence is, do you want to have a uniform? I said yes. Had my first uniform made at about £7,500, which you pay for. But then when I got appointed as a rep DL, I knew that I'd got to do a lot more duties. So I went to and had another one made, but much thinner fabric. So although it's a hot day, this is not frightfully hot. But you have to then buy the shoulder boards, which are £1,000 each. You get the sword, which is presented to you, but you make a gift to one of the Queen's charities in return for having the sword. You also have other props that you wear a hat. My staff say it makes me look more like Benny Hill than anything else. Also, you have to have white gloves, but they've got to be fabric. They can't be leather, because if you have leather ones and you shake hands with, say, 200 people, at the end of it, they're so slippery, you can't wear them again. So effectively, you end up by having a series of props, and you've just got to be able to make sure they're right. And equally, it's got to be a case of, if you want to wear the uniform and do the bits, you've got to be prepared to accept the fact that, one, you don't get paid for anything. And I can assure you that if you're going to arrive somewhere and you've got the sword on, I didn't wear the sword today, no, I was going to sit in a chair, because when you sit, the sword is equivalent with your head, right? And also you have to wear a second belt, which then pulls you in even further. So I keep the sword I wear if I'm going to stand and haven't got to get out of the car too often. But again, it's a form of prop. The royal family no longer want you to wear uniform. I've done duties with, say, Prince Edward and the Duke of Cambridge, say at a school, and the children rush up, assume I'm the prince because I'm in a uniform, and they ignore the person in question. So it's a very bizarre sort of situation. The lieutenancy was created by Henry VIII, and you were given authority to create an army to support the monarch. And that lasted till 1921. So up until 1921, that person could form that particular role. A lot of you have probably heard of somebody who becomes a sheriff. A sheriff holds a role for 1 year. The end of 1 year, that's it. They don't do anything further. With the role of the lieutenancy, if you get appointed when you're 40, you're there till you're 75. End of story. And you get commissioned by Buckingham Palace, and you get commissioned by the Cabinet Office. So when you do certain things, you have to make sure that it complies with all the relevant protocols which are required, including not being political. So when you join the lieutenancy, you step down from any political party. You can't even be a weekly member or monthly member. You have to be able to keep to those roles. And it's the way it happens. Now in London, it's been interesting that the London lieutenancy has only ever had one lady Lord Lieutenant. And that was 1978 to 1985, when they had Baroness Phillips. But things have changed, where 20 years ago, the person who took the role would be in the military. They would be white, end of story, and they would hold that role for the period of time. Things have changed. Now within the lieutenancy, we probably have 50% ladies. Our current Vice Lord Lieutenant is a lady, Jane Davis. She was military, but she doesn't fit within the calibre of what was always expected. She is very East End. The Duchess of Cornwall adores her and would rather have her than anybody else. And our present Lord Lieutenant is Nigerian, which, in light of some of the comments which have been made in the recent past, is interesting. And then if you look at places like Bristol, they have Peaches Golding, who is a Jamaican lady. So, the whole thing has totally changed over the number of years. But it's interesting when you watch the support that you get from the palace. The royal family get to know you. And I've done a little list which may amuse, which relates to the different people who you deal with. The Queen, I was at an event which was a passing out parade, and she said to me very quietly, she said, have you noticed the mistake, Mr. Barber? So I said, no. She said, they're marching in the wrong direction. But I'm sure nobody will notice if you haven't. And she then sort of thought it was extremely amusing. Another occasion, I had a call from her secretary to say she was going to a particular location, and could I influence the person who should be hosting it to actually attend, who would never attend, which I did. And then I saw her about 3 days later, and she said, what blackmail did you use to get him to come? So I said, I just told him that your daughter, who he likes to flirt with the Princess Royal, she might be there. Ah, you used bait then. The Duke of Edinburgh had a very wicked sense of humour, as everybody knew, but he would have been in his element today to have ladies. And the last time I did an official engagement with him was fairly amusing. I was in charge. The normal procedure is you get given a group of 6 people and you host them and then do the introductions. So we'd had the Queen and the Duke was coming up, and there was 2 men, 4 ladies, and out of the ladies, one was a young, pretty Chinese girl. So prior to him arriving, I just said to them, right, he will welcome you, say a few words, and then he'll want to talk to this young lady. And the young lady said, why do you think that? I said, because you're young and pretty. So lo and behold, this literally happened. He did courtesies with each of the people. Then he got to this young lady who said, so I'm delighted to meet you. And he said, American Chinese. And she then said, no, born in Britain. He said, there must be an anagram for this. And she went, I don't know. He then spent the next 5 minutes chatting to her. And by this stage, the procedure normally is when the Queen's 1 row along, she'll look back, see how the next person is. We got to the stage where she was 4 groups on, and he was still chatting. And I said to him, sir, I think you better move on. No, I'm not ready, I'm having fun. So ultimately, I said to him, Her Majesty's now 6 rows along. Oh God, I better move. Lovely to meet you, and it's gone, right? But totally different, he's got that sort of personality. Prince of Wales, he has got a very wicked sense of humour. The last time I was with him was just before the lockdown, and we went to a church which deals with people from Sri Lanka. And we sat down and he said, where's the music? Where's the hymns? So I said to him, I don't know. And somebody gave us one, and then he looked up, and it was above the stage that people were on. And he said, well, a couple of silly old buggers, aren't we? Didn't we notice it? When everything was finished, my role normally is you're there in the background, you do the introductions. And one of the things you have to do when you go to look after the royals is you do a recce. So one of the things you do on the recce is you check the nearest lavatories. You do that prior to the visit, or when you go and do the recce, but on the day of the visit, you actually, excuse me, you actually go and check. There's a light in there. Sometimes they've not. They've redecorated and taken the light bulb out so it would be in the dark, or no toilet paper, or no towel, so you make sure that's done. You learn your role as you go along. And on this particular occasion, he said, I need the lavatory. And somebody said, oh, it's over there, sir. And he then proceeded to open the broom cupboard. And everything fell out on the floor. And he thought it was hysterical. He found the loo. By then, everything had been put away. And I just said to him, sir, I didn't realise you were going to come and break the place up. And he said, I enjoy doing things like that. So again, different personality. After that visit, one of his equerries contacted me. And my original origins was in the property business. And the equerry rang and said, His Royal Highness wonders if you can help one of our equerries who needs accommodation. So I went to Clarence's house, met the chap, sorted out what he wanted, then proceeded to find him a property. And after I'd done that, I had a call to go for lunch to Clarence's house with Charles. And I just said to him, how did you know I'd been involved in the property business? Oh, he said, I looked up all your records. He said, and thank goodness you did the job properly, which was, I nearly said to him, can I have a fee? But he didn't answer that. The Duchess of Cornwall is very relaxed. The basis that she loves children, I think, is questionable, because when I've been with her and there's been little children, it's a case of, yes, lovely. But she's fine, you know, she'll do the job well. Princess Royal is extremely quick with her brain. She has a lady in waiting who I know and whose brother's got a house near to us in Ireland. And it's normally when I receive her, she'll say, oh, now do remember I'm here as well while you're gossiping in the background. But you just smile nicely and say, yes, don't worry, whatever. She went to the craft college in one particular area, and there was a young chap who was using a chisel, and they were very concerned, all the security people, of people with things like this, if somebody was not quite right. And she immediately went off path, across to this young chap with a chisel, and you could see every security person came round her. And she said, you're using a number 3 chisel. If I was doing that, I'd use number 2. Why are you using a number 3? And he told her, really interesting, I'll bear that in mind. And she actually got him to make a piece for her house. So, you know, a very human person. Prince Edward is very relaxed. He's very involved with the Duke of Edinburgh Awards, as you know, and he does that job very well. A little while ago, I had to organise, during Zoom, for 18 people to talk to him by Zoom, which we got organised. Then we discovered that some of the people were involved with varying organisations that could cause problems like Extinction Rebellion. So we then had to have another thought. So I arranged for somebody, I'm no good with technology, it leaves me cold. So I arranged for somebody, if I raised my hands like this, they would cut the person off the moment there was problems. So we got to number 17. Number 18 was a young lady with a baby. And the prince had said he would love to see the baby as well. So went on to her, and she was using a laptop. There was only one thing, she was feeding the baby. So we saw more of her breast than we saw anything else. And it's fairly hilarious that you suddenly discovered that Prince Edward, from looking like this, was going, yes, it's been very good. It was so embarrassing, you wanted the earth to open up, but he handled it, it was good. Prince William, he is a total delight. it's very interesting to watch as time has gone by how he and Catherine, she has gained confidence, which at the beginning, early years, she didn't have the confidence. But to be fair, on one occasion I went and it was in a fairly rough part of London, and suddenly there was 1,500 people screaming for them. They got out of the car and people were being, some of them very nice, some of them horrible. And she found it difficult, I think, as anybody would, and it threw her. But as the years have come and gone, she's got better and better. One of the most amusing times with them was they were due to be at the Olympic Park, and they were going into West Ham Stadium and then onto the running ground, and ended up by being on television quite a lot. So I had done the recce the week previously, and my driver took me there. Everything was fine. Came out. The following week when I arrived to do the duty, and I always get there an hour early, the road had gone because it's part of the Olympic site and they're redeveloping it. So drove and drove. In the end, I had to ring the organisers and say, how do we get in? Can't get through the door. They got us in. We then saw the due time when the royals were due to come, Range Rover go along, Outriders. Saw it turn around and go back the other way. And 20 minutes later, they arrived. It was fairly amusing. Prince Harry was with them. And his opening words were not, lovely to see you, was a few expletives of how difficult it had been to be able to get there. But, it was fine. But it was a very good occasion. The Duchess is always wants to chat and has a lovely way with her. Duke of Gloucester is interesting. He's an architect. He gets asked, as he puts it, to open public lavatories or something of a similar nature because he can discuss the architecture. And the other thing is you have to ring his equerry in the morning and make sure that he's remembered to put 2 black shoes on or 2 brown shoes on, because sometimes he arrives in odd shoes, but not all the time. And on one particular occasion, he arrived, car pulled up, and he stood and looked at this building, and he said, oh, magnificent, magnificent, aren't I lucky? And I said, no, sir, that was opened by your great-grandfather in 1908. It's this one. Oh, my God. So we went inside, and when we had done the recce, we had his security team had gone round, and they got to a certain point and said, we can smell marijuana being smoked. If it's being smoked the day we arrive, we'll have to go and arrest them. So we arrive, and it was one of the occasions where I had to wear spurs, which are a nightmare. Going upstairs and coming down, you normally lose one of the spurs, so that's interesting. We go upstairs, we're standing on the landing, and there's a smell of marijuana. And the Duke said, oh, wonderful, it takes me back to my university days. So instantly, the problem was resolved. But he's very good. He's a perfectly ordinary person. He's got no airs and graces. Prince Harry, I chaired 3 of his committees. Total delight. He was very... he went to the Excel Centre to do a particular event to do with the London Marathon. His equerry was a lady called Helen Wong. She and I had done it the night before, and the conversation got round to, he was going to do an interview about losing his mother. And I commented that I'd lost my mother at a similar age. So at the end of the event, when everything had gone wrong that could have gone wrong on this particular day, like there would only be 6 people there, there was about 100, and everybody was going a bit mad. We finished the event, and then he said, Helen has told me we have similar histories. Come here, I want to give you a bear hug. And it was fairly amusing to be given a bear hug, which some of my colleagues probably would not have quite approved of for it to happen. But it's lovely. You end up by having something which is different from normal. I'd met the Duchess, not an easy woman. 3 times I met her, and there was issues. She's the only member of the royal family I have ever made a complaint about. She was so rude to the staff and reduced one of them to tears. Great pity, because she would have been such a wonderful influx into the family. The people I don't receive are basically the people who are on the payroll, anybody's payroll. So don't receive Princess Eugenie or Beatrice. Don't receive Princess Michael or Prince Michael. But his brother, Duke of Kent and Alexander, do get received because Prince Michael of Kent, when he married a divorced woman, gave up his position in line to the throne. He's now got that position back because they did some mixing around with documents. And that's how it basically worked. But one of the good things with the royals, the event I did with Prince Edward, with the lady feeding the baby, I got 8 young people who were doing the Duke of Edinburgh Award to come with their commanding officer. And it went extremely well. And as a result of which, Prince William went and visited the cadets at the very poor East London location, and it went down a bomb. They were really well received. Within my role, I end up, a lot of people who are here who know me will know that I lose track of what I'm patron of, chairman of, have to present. I mean, I remarked today that it's very nice to have this room as it is. I can see everybody. I had to do a speech to 1,000 people and give 250 awards out. But the difficulty was you could see everybody on the front row, but after the front row, you couldn't see anybody. So nobody ever wants to sit on the front row, but you knew they were there, hiding. So it's lovely to be able to see people properly today, and it makes all the difference. But to be fair, when you're dealing with the royals, they are just ordinary people. You don't get a problem of them being probably the only one who would ever be difficult could be the Duke of York. So we all used to say, no, you can do this one. Only because he could be difficult. Because, again, within the protocol line, were your shoes clean enough? So he would remark if they weren't, in writing. You had a cat's hair on your left shoulder, and there was a small stain at the bottom of your trousers, but you might have had to walk a long way with him, and you're bound to get something, but you just learn to accept it. But the role is interesting. A number of my family have held this sort of position before, and it's rather lovely to be able to do, because I work on the basis, I was chair of a school, and within the school, they had a lot of problems. They could never get attention. The moment I was appointed in 2007, suddenly everybody wanted to come and see the school and be part of it. So it makes all the difference because you've got the position. I now sit on the committee that gives out the knighthoods, CBEs, OBEs, etc. During the pandemic, it's been quite interesting. One of the applications, because people currently are putting themselves forward for OBEs, etc., was that this particular person was feeding 10,000 people a week. That's quite a lot of people to feed. So I didn't know them, so I made varying inquiries to somebody who knows everything, and it turned out they were feeding 100 people a month, not quite 10,000. So you get some, at the moment, we've reviewed probably recently 20,000 applications, self-applications from people, and out of that 20,000, probably 500 are genuine. The rest are all totally bogus. And it looks really bad. You're looking at something to say, oh, this person, But what they're saying sounds wonderful. But then you go down. I mean, what I'll do is I'll often go into the area in which they're in, dressed in a pair of shabby trousers, etc., and just chat to the shopkeepers and do you know so-and-so? That's the way you can find out what's going on. and it's useful. I mean, my PA is a magistrate, and she'll often say, I know that name. They've been before me on the bench. So you get to know what is going on. But how's that? Is that all right for you?
We're going to sit
Lovely,
down
thank you.
now, and we're going to ask you some questions and get down to the nitty-gritty,
The real nitty-gritty.
the real nitty-gritty. I've got the bamboo shoots and the rubber hoses back here if you don't fess up.
Well, you know what I like.
First of all, I don't know if I understand, how many years do you serve as a deputy lieutenant?
Well, you have to finish at 75. So if you get appointed at 40, you're there for 35 years.
Oh, so.
I got appointed in 2007 when I was 60. So I would have done 15 years by the time I finish. Things will change because the difficulty is there's one person who's about to retire who's held the role for 35 years. 35 years can be too long, so you've got to be a little bit sensible. But I have deputies who then will do duties for me. So at the moment, at this present moment, there are 2 people I put forward to take the role. One is a young man who is, in his own words, if he hadn't joined something called the Imps, and the Imps is a group of people who ride motorbikes, and you see them at the Edinburgh Festival, and they ride the motorbikes through hoops of fire and things like that, but from the age of 7, and they get taught how to clean their shoes, look after their clothes, treat their elders and so on like that. This chap, Jamie, he was one of them. He said that everybody he knew was either in a knife gang or whatever it may be. He proceeded to set up a window cleaning business at 18, sold it at 21, bought a car lot and sold cars. Then he went into the bailiff for a company, went to them and told them that your business is not being run properly, there's a lot of things going on. They thought he was a bright chap, so they sent him and he did an MBA. The end result, he became the general manager. He ended up by buying the business, which at the age of 38, he sold to a Chinese company for £40 million. He put 20 million of that money into his 2 little daughters' names, 3 and 5, as a charitable fund to grow and give money. He now is 41, he's worth £300 million, but he gives to the Imps who started him £50,000 a year. Now he is somebody, if he becomes a lieutenant, which I think he will do, he will still be doing the job at 75, which has got to be good. The other person I put forward is, he's the son of a life Labour peer, long dead, but he's very good in the city. He supports huge numbers of charities, and he is somebody who he's a Mr. Fixer. So if I need something done, or at Christmas there was a lot of charities didn't have any money, contacted my friend Alistair and said, this charity gives 4,000 Christmas presents to children. They've lost all their funding. We need to better make sure they can do it. And between Jamie, Alistair and I put together £30,000. They bought the children's toys and there was surplus for another year. Again, somebody who's prepared to do the things, and you've got to be prepared that you go, whatever you do. I mean, for argument's sake, last night I came in from the office at 4:30. At 6 o'clock I left and had to, in my uniform, to do a passing out parade for air training cadets, which was outside in the open. It took 2 hours to do. You get home at 8:30, 9 o'clock, you haven't eaten, but you just accept it because it's part of what you do.
So why do you think, other than your obvious charming personality and your ability in the city, why were you chosen, do you think?
I think the main reason was that I'd been involved with a number of charities to help them. I'd had varying involvements. One of the difficulties is that this world often looks upon young people and single mothers, lesbians, mixed race people, etc. But there's one group that they often miss out on, and that's the elderly. I'm chief executive of a charity, and we look after the elderly. And whenever we wanted anything for the elderly to be done, there was never the facility available. There was never somebody who would speak up for their rights. And I went to a number of conferences, and one of them I was more or less asked to leave because I was asking questions which they didn't like. Somebody who's 65 needs X and needs Y, and you're told, well, they get their state pension, so we look after them, which sensibly isn't correct. So I then started to get quite a lot of publicity in newspapers and things like that, and there was problems with where my office is in a very mixed ethnic area, and I went out and gave the support to those races. I had an office in the area, and when I opened the office in 1981, if you moved to a certain area and you happened not to be white British, you would be harassed until you moved. And varying things happened because I would support them, such as somebody breaking into my office, into the flats above, turning the taps on and bringing the ceiling down, and setting the building on fire on other occasions. So because you've done the things to support often people who haven't got very much, is the reason why you do it. I mean, sensibly, you don't want it to be people who are, for argument's sake, the Earl of Cadogan is a deputy lieutenant. His son, Viscount Chelsea, they will have the role, but they won't do the higher, more responsible jobs which are needed to be able to help to promote things. They'll be there. If somebody needs money, you can probably go to them, but they don't want to physically be involved. And that's how it often occurs.
But I mean, it has to be a financial burden that you have to buy the uniform, you have to do all of these services. So it's remarkable that the fabric that is supporting the royal family, I think most of us would imagine, that it's a stream of very wealthy, aristocratic people, but actually they're to be commended for the fact that they are approaching people who are, who are ordinary, not to say that you are ordinary, but, who are, not what we would imagine a very blue-blooded type. But clearly that was not always the case, as you said, that, before. You would have not been recognized had you been Jamaican or,
I mean, I can look back at, varying people who I know reasonably well, even some of my own family, and they were given the role because of people they knew to be able to do it. I was appointed by a man called David Brewer. He was Lord Mayor of the City of London. David is incredible. He and his wife were very charitable-minded, and they've done things like Tessa, his wife, is chairman of the Sheriff and Recorder's Fund, which supports prisoners leaving prison, setting them up, Suited and Booted, which I helped to found, which provides clothes to people, male and female, to be able to go out. David was appointed Lord Lieutenant, and he was completely surprised to have been appointed. The Queen adored him because he has a very wicked sense of humour. And when he ultimately got to 75, he was already a knight, but the Queen made him a member of the Garter. And if you bear in mind, there are only 12 members of the Garter outside of the royal family. A very privileged thing to do. Now, when I finish in 18 months' time, you might get a knighthood, you might get nothing at all. It's very simple. Mainly, I've been offered things in the past and I have declined them, right? Because sometimes you only get it because it's for you, right? But I looked upon the lieutenancy as being something which helped other people. You could go out and help other people. I've been very lucky in my life. I have nothing to complain about. You know, I've been fortunate. I went bankrupt once and I came out of it the other side and I'm still here, which is what matters, you know. And you've got to be able to be sensible of how you deal with things. And it's not always the great and the good. Certainly there's a couple of people here who know there's a story that I sat on a committee in Essex and they did something called Wings and Wheels at Audley End House, which involved the Lord Lieutenant of the day of Essex, Lord Braybrook. And I arrived a few minutes late for the meeting because I'd come off the motorway and somebody said, "Who are we waiting for?" And somebody said, "Oh, all we're waiting for is that East End gutter snipe to arrive." Now that's how people's minds, right? But ultimately, Robin Braybrook was asked to step down as Lord Lieutenant because of his attitude towards women, other races, and was homophobic. And the royal household wouldn't accept it. Oh, plus he had about 20 illegitimate children, but that was beside the point.
Now, are we going to really get into it now then? Listen, I know I'm going to open it up for questions, forgive me for reading my phone, but our fairy back at headquarters is sending me questions from our Zoom audience who couldn't be here today. But I am certain someone's going to stand up and ask something else about Meghan. And may I say that people who I have not heard of for years somehow found my email after the Oprah Winfrey interview, thinking somehow that my residence in London meant that I was a guru about Harry and Meghan. But I will say that there is an appreciation in the United States that this kind of emotive venting and let's all hug and get real is a wonderful thing. And the perception of her there, I think, is very different to here. I'm wondering, you alluded to the fact that it's, you know, she could be difficult, but what do you do if someone comes up and says to you, you know, is this woman impossible? There must be a line of decorum that you have to hold, but at the same time, tell us, is she impossible?
I think the biggest difficulty really is that with Prince Harry, one of the things which was really adorable with him was that I would get a phone call to say, Prince Harry is popping over on Wednesday. Could you possibly be there? You don't have to receive him, but just welcome him. So one particular day I went across to a place which was a sort of place where you would question whether you'd have your wheels left on the car when you went back. And got across there, and it was a boxing club for boys and girls who had been through gangs, knife crime, and it was part of the magistrates would assign them to attend there to get rid of their anger. And they had arranged for about 30 young people who had been involved with gangs and crime and so on like that to attend. They arranged varying forms of transport. They were all petrified about coming because if anybody found out, they would have trouble. So they'd sent a taxi that came from 30 miles away from where they lived to bring them. And they all arrived. They were all nice kids and they were there and chatting. And Prince Harry then came very quietly through the back. He was in a filthy car, and you could always guarantee, they tell me often, your car looks really dirty. I don't particularly worry about my car being dirty, but the royal cars are always immaculate. But he arrived in a fairly elderly Range Rover with his security team. And he went in and he sat in with all of them. They didn't realise who he was to begin with. And then he started to ask them questions. And he was great. He was absolutely superb. You couldn't fault him in any shape or form. The committees I was involved with him on related to young people and crime and mental health issues. And he brought Megan across to meet me, introduced me, and I just found it slightly difficult when he went to say something and he said it, and she said, "No, I don't think you said that very well. You should have said X." And I thought, hold on, you don't say this, which I found slightly difficult. And also, I sat next to him and he was about to make a speech, and he said, it was quite a complicated speech, and I said to him, "How have you got on with the speech?" "Yes, it was all finished yesterday. I've got it here." She leant across, picked up the speech, tore it in two, and said, "I've rewritten it. This sounds much better." Oh. All right? Which you just don't do. All right? So I realised there might be some issues coming, so I stepped away from being involved with his committees and said I had too many other things on. With the royal household, you get to know quite a number of them, so I'd have lunch in a greasy spoon type place in Westminster, and one of them said, "Very strange, Prince Harry has sent his dogs across to Canada." This was in the October. I said, "Really? Why?" He said, "We don't know." Subsequently, I then heard from somebody else who's involved with them, they're going to spend Christmas in Canada. So the next time I had lunch, I said, "You know they're going to spend Christmas in Canada?" He said, "Well, it's been on the grapevine." I said, "Does the Queen realise?" Because it's by tradition, you know, her first grandchild, they always go for. And he said, "No, everybody else has got wind of it except for Prince of Wales and Her Majesty." It ended up by being the Queen, which is very unusual, telephoned and was told they were going to be away. And she was very upset. So that was an indication of where you were going. And their method of getting away, I think, had been planned for a very, very long while. And I'm told there were other things which, like a previous property had been bought, and then security looked at it and told them it was not secure. So it's difficult. I mean, I think, to be fair about it, with the royals, they have changed dramatically in lots of things they do, but there has to be a level to where you still come to. I mean, for argument's sake, Prince Harry came to the Olympic Stadium for the baseball, which I remember you were very keen on because of your family connections.
The New York Yankees-Red Sox game. And when John was in the backseat of the car, he mentioned that he was going and was rather upset at having to go. And I was like, "Oh my God, please, can I have that ticket? Do you know what it's like to be a Red Sox fan and not get a ticket to of course, naturally, the Red Sox lost. But that was where there was the first indication, I think, that she was difficult.
Yeah, it was the crowning one because officially he was supposed to be there by himself. When I arrived, we'd already done the recce. They were going to be there 7 hours, so you're with them for 7 hours for the whole day. And first of all, there was issues about where my car could go, which meant that my driver couldn't leave the car for 7 hours. And then he couldn't get back in once he'd left if he didn't have me. So we had to resolve that, which was the organisers' problem. But it was the Help for Heroes was the basis. Then the owner of the New Yorker's wife and he wanted to be presented. By this stage, we knew that the Duchess was coming. And this woman said to me, "Oh," she said, "it's wonderful. Now, do I kiss her on both cheeks? And how long before she's Queen?" So I said, "Well, there's 6 to die, and then I think you need to discuss it." And I said, no. And she said, I've been practicing my curtsy. But she did this curtsy that ended up by her being spread across the floor. And I said, no, you don't do anything like that these days. You bob your head. So they arrived, but unfortunately, the Duchess was inappropriately dressed. She had a dress on showing too much cleavage. She had no tights or anything on her legs, which the Queen would go fairly ballistic over. And she had a pair of shoes on, and while she was talking to people, she was slipping them on and off all the time. Just, things you don't do. And it just was very sad. And as the event went on, she insisted, instead of being on the balcony to watch it, she wanted to be in with the crowd, moved a whole row of people so she could be there, saying no one will recognise her. She put a baseball cap on and sunglasses and walked in with Prince Harry. Now, you wouldn't notice her at all, would you? So the end result was the security people could not control people, a lot of Americans, standing on the back of chairs, taking photos and screaming. So she then got upset and then blamed everybody else for it occurring, which was not correct. I say, it's the only time I have ever had to make a complaint, because to reduce a member of the household to tears, you don't do it. And it was for Help for Heroes. There was a lot of the people who had got fatal injuries. Harry was brilliant. He went around the room, he chatted, he was his normal self. She didn't want to know. She wouldn't go around with him, right? And you knew there was going to be problems, because there is a role. If you become a member of the royal family, you have to accept what you have to do. There isn't any ifs or buts, and it's end of the story. It's very difficult. But I think I've got a number of American friends who think that the British royal family are racist, which they're not, because the member of staff who I was asked to help find a property was a very nice chap. He looked after all the things of a military nature that Prince of Wales had to deal with, but his partner is a male Jamaican. And the Prince of Wales office contacted me when they agreed to buy a particular property and said, will he be safe in that area? Because Tom is such a good chap, we don't want him to have distress by having his partner being harassed. The original area they were looking to move in, they had problems with being harassed, because this chap, they looked at a flat that was in a predominantly Indian area, and the Indian people did not want somebody from Nigerian or Jamaican or any other race coming into that particular location. But, to be fair, Prince of Wales took the trouble to want to know that a member of his staff, who wasn't one of the top echelons, he was one of 6 people who get changed every 2 years within the military, was safe and secure because of his partner. That has got to prove, there is nothing. And I also sit on the diversity committee for the palace. And very interestingly, 15 years ago, Buckingham Palace was basically 100% male. They wanted to get it to female at that particular stage, and now it's 55% female, 45% male. But it's very difficult to get anybody to work long-term within the palace who is Indian, Chinese, or whatever. They'll do it for 6 months or a year, but they won't do it as a career. One of the reasons now that they're no longer called a royal servant, they're given much nicer titles.
Now, I can't monopolize him, and I'm mindful of time for lunch. So, Eve, did you have a question? And then I will repeat it for our in-home viewing audience.
Thank you so much. It's been so fascinating. But I want to ask you the opposite of what you've just been telling us. What are the benefits of the position? And what do you actually enjoy doing as part of your duties? So look at the opposite.
Well, I enjoy people, and I enjoy, a lot of it relates to young people, and being able to help young people to be able to gain something. I mean, it depends on how you want to be able to deal with the role. Right, for argument's sake, Holocaust Day, which I attend, officially, everybody who's on Holocaust Day who attends, which is mainly schools and people like that, perhaps 2,500 people, I'm the last person to walk in and they have to stand up. But I think that's too pompous. So I actually go in and talk to them beforehand, and then I will take my seat at the appropriate time. But what is enjoyable is that you meet all types of people. You very rarely meet the rich, to be perfectly fair about it. 9 times out of 10, it's people who sometimes want guidance. I had a very nice head teacher who I dealt with, and he had varying issues, and I was asked to help him to get over some of his issues by teaching him probably some of life skills. But I just find the benefits you get is you wear a heavy uniform which you pay for, you have a driver that you have to pay for, but you do cause a sensation when you walk into a restaurant, which I did last evening. I walked in and somebody thought I was from the Salvation Army.
Are there any other questions?
Young
Yes.
lady there.
Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, that question that Eve asked was, what are the parts of the job that you enjoy? That was the question John just answered. Yes. Yes. I'm going to ask you, I know it's illegal, but just take your mask off because I can't hear. Great, thank you.
Well, the area I look after is Newham. So Newham is unusual because Newham has got the Olympic Stadium, so you get the royals flocking, and we have City Airport. So City Airport means, like, when Prince Philip died, I was on the committee that when Philip died, I would have to be doing certain things because I have an airport, right? So a year ago, before the pandemic, I had 3 heads of state arrive. So you have somebody from the Foreign Office, their ambassador, and myself to receive for the Queen. So my area, because it's such a big area with so many people and a very diverse community, I mean, they say there's 350,000. Unofficially, they think there's probably 500,000 people, which is the equivalent of, you know, a very large shire. Hence the reason I'm allowed to wear these, but if you had somebody who was not a Rep DL, they couldn't wear this and they couldn't wear the sash. They have to wear a red sash and no shoulder balls. You have a flat piece. So it just distinguishes between the people. But, you know, it's interesting. I've got other colleagues. I do probably 100 to 120 events a year. But I've got colleagues, say, who look after Brent or look after Westminster, who might do 30 or 40 events in a year or less. But it's because I've got the honeypots of the Olympic Stadium they all want to come to. And the City Airport. I mean, City Airport can be quite amusing. I've received 3 heads of state, and the heads of state are dropped off by the plane outside the VIP lounge. The plane then taxis over, stops, and all their staff get out and come back in a coach, right? But one of them was quite amusing. It was to do with the Chinese president, and they bought this huge bouquet of flowers for the president's wife. But it was one of those ones which has got the water in the bottom. So they'd each done the varying things and they'd been sensible. This person was so anxious, the ambassador, he put this huge thing of flowers on the chair and it promptly went that way, and the sofa they were supposed to sit on was saturated with water. It was like being on a sponge. and they're literally standing by the door. So it was literally a case of the staff moved it out of the way and put 2 chairs there. But it was, you know, you get a very amusing thing. I mean, arriving to do something like that, you've got the scanners going underneath your car. They've got the sniffer dogs sniffing you all over. There's people standing there with machine guns. Sometimes you think, okay, yes, don't shoot me, please.
That's when you need the sword. Are there other questions? I'm moving along. Anne? And stand up, and then we can have you, and I'll repeat it.
Sorry, I'll try to speak more loudly.
Oh,
Thank you very much indeed for a really interesting talk. It's been fascinating. I have a question regarding our own charitable initiative that Mary mentioned earlier. We're looking to form a new group led by one or more of our ladies to get more involved in charitable activities. And it's clear you do a lot of this work and guide a lot of people. I wonder whether you might have any advice for us as to, you know, how clubs such as ours might best organise ourselves to make a difference, and what sort of things you think it might be helpful for us to get involved in. And I'm asking this so that whoever, and I hope somebody here might well look to take it on, whoever does take it on might have an idea of where, you know, they might take it in the first instance.
The question is, what advice might John give for KCWC to pursue a kind of charitable initiative? So where and how might, what would be a good source or a cause that's close to, I mean, you have many causes close to your heart. I know the Haven was, and many causes, but
I think it's very interesting because you've got to be able to go with something that has the appeal to everybody. And very bizarrely, 5 years ago, I was asked to organise a conference for the Royal College of Defence. And the process used to be that they would come to one borough, then another borough the next year. But it ended up by being, they have been to my borough. We used to be once a year, now it's twice a year, which is getting a bit extreme because it takes a lot of organising. I organise speakers. And what is always interesting is to be able to get speakers who will appeal across the board, because you've got military from all around the world, every rank from a lieutenant to major generals and whatever. And one I recently did was for a charity founded 5 years ago. I got their chief executive to be the speaker. He's a young man, 35, 38 years of age. And his charity was set up to help parents who have got a child who has behavioural health issues, who can often be violent, and the parents can't cope. And this particular charity was set up 5 years ago with no government funding and no funding from local authorities, and they have prospered really well. Because it's something which everybody has an interest in, right? You've got a mental health issue, you've got a young child issue, you've got parents who have, they might have an income of £100, £150 a week, but that's their total income. To be able to manage perhaps 6 children who don't necessarily come from England, don't know how to cook a vegetable, don't know how to ask for the foods in the shops, so they have to stick within their communities. And this particular charity has really done well. And interestingly, from them appearing, there has been a remarkable response, because this was put on a webinar and people wanted to hear more about what they could do to support the charity. But I would have thought, to be quite honest with you, we all know within Kensington and Chelsea areas, yes, you've got the super rich and you've got the other parts which aren't in that area. And I would have thought that from this charity's point of view, or from a charitable enterprise, would be to go into an area where you will have somebody who is running a breakfast club, right? In the very poor areas, you will find breakfast clubs. But I'm very happy to give help to Mary, very happily, because I mean, for argument's sake, within sight of the Olympic Stadium, in 2008, somebody came to me and said, the funding for the Breakfast Club has now gone. This particular area, the children are being pushed out their front door at 7 o'clock in the morning when the parents go to work and they're told to go to McDonald's for breakfast, and they're 5, 6, 7 years of age wandering on the street. Ended up by being that via the City of London, I got a couple of deliveries to support. 10 years, 15 years later, it's still going. Now, no longer needs the support from elsewhere because the local charities, and I'm fairly wicked because what I actually say, in the Newham area, a huge number of Indian people who have made phenomenal money, who now appear in the Sunday Times Asian list being worth 5, 6, 7, 800 million pounds. So I've told them, you've made your money in the East, you bring your money back to the East and help. And literally show them what the problem is. I mean, I took a group of them around in my car and showed them little kids on the street sitting on dirty old mattresses and on walls, and there was the Olympic Stadium immediately next door. And there's an amazing woman who actually runs a homeless centre on the Olympic site and feeds those who can't feed themselves. All started off by needing funding from elsewhere. So you need to find a charity which is in your area from the grassroots and spread some muck on it to make it make money. You know, from the famous film with Barber, you've got to spread it around.
Well, and we'll honestly be happy if we can just get back to even having, you know, an activity where people will volunteer and help existing charities, even if we never get to that point of raising money again for a charity. But I'm going to ask one last question, if you don't mind, from the viewing audience. If it's a quick question, let's just, yes.
I'm really enjoying your talk today. I had a question. You said that you lodged a complaint, or the committee lodged a complaint against Megan. What was the outcome when she was being difficult with staff?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
A quick answer to this. When you lodged the complaint against Megan with the committee, what was the reaction, and was there a resolution?
Well, when I lodged it, the words from the person who I gave it to was, we will put it on the pile with the others.
Oh.
I was not the first person. I'd probably had the worst, visually seeing the worst situation. I mean, very simply, the girl who was reduced to tears is probably earning $25,000 a year. And you know, if I've got to tell one of my staff off, you go quietly into another room and do something. But in this instance, it wasn't the girl's fault. It was Megan's fault. She was one who changed. In fact, instead of being there 7 hours, they were there 3.5 hours because it had become so fraught. It was very distressing. Plus, it was 87 degrees.
Yeah.
So it was rather hot as well.
Now, I'm cognizant of time. What I'm going to do is ask if there were questions that I missed. Oh, wait, well, John, we have to have John ask a question.
I just want to ask.
John Nolan is...
I just want to ask, how do the wards deal when we go to a situation and there's maybe some hostility and against them with regard to anti-Marcus and things like that? How do they deal with that, or do you get a lot of that? I know visits are fairly protected, but do you get a lot of hostility to people shouting against them?
No. I can probably say I can only ever remember one particular occasion, and that was with Prince Edward. And there was he was excellent, right? He planted a tree, and he had a child with him at a school. So he dug the hole for the tree, they put the tree in, and all the other children were standing there watching. So once the official photo was done, he then said, right, okay, you better come and help me plant the tree. They took the tree out, put it back in. So we're standing there, and one of his security people said, oh my God, here she is. And he has a stalker.
Oh.
And this very large lady, who you could tell was coming a little bit before she arrived because of the pong. And she had a very nice bunch of petrol station flowers, probably bought about a month before, which were dead. And she was insistent that she gave them to him because she classed him as being a rotten flower. And the security person took it, and he said, thank you very much. He said, shall I give it back to you for the next time you appear? And he said that she would, wherever they went, she would map out a route to be there. But in all honesty, I've never, ever seen anything. And we're talking about Newham, has been Labour for 110 years. It has the Member of Parliament, Stephen Timms, with a 43,500 majority for Labour. So you're in an area, but to be perfectly fair, Eastern Europeans who have moved in adore the Royals. The Eastern Europeans are probably the people who may, if they can vote, would change Newham into Liberal or Conservative because they believe the Labour Party is communism. So it's very different. But to answer your question, John, never, ever has there been anything. You know, there's never been an occasion. When I had to go for the state banquet for the President of China, that was a totally different thing. There was so much violence going on. If you didn't have a green pass on your car, you couldn't get near to where you had to go. And although it would never be properly announced, it was on the streets in London. Boris Johnson was there, and they had water cannons in readiness. Never used, but they were there.
Now, I'm going to promise that if there are questions that I wasn't able to take, if you will email them to me at president@kcwc.org.uk, I will get an answer from John, and that includes the question that came in from the viewing audience as to whether or not you're going to get into trouble because I made you say indiscreet things. But all that remains for me to say before I make a few announcements and get everyone out to who's going to lunch is, John, thank you, thank you,
Pleasure.
thank you. It has been a pleasure, and I know everyone wants to say thank you. So I am going to make a couple of announcements to close. That is that Monday, June 7th, between 2 and 4, the book club that's doing The Tattooist of Auschwitz, they, not surprisingly with that topic, may need a few more people who might be interested in reading that book. Foodies, Wednesday, June 16th, there is a Make Pizza al fresco event. There were still a few places left for that. And sadly, which I will miss, I would have loved to have gone to that. And also the final announcement, and that is that we hope to return in September and October with a no-fee guest policy. We want everyone who's a member to feel free to bring a guest to the September 9th Come One, Come All luncheon, which we will be hosting Thursday, September 9th at the Mayfair Townhouse. I put that picture in because I expect to have that many people attend. And also October, we will be back at the RGS to hear Peter Daisley, a photographer in Kensington and Chelsea, talking about London theater. That's a topic I've always wanted to explore, the history of London theater, how it is that it came to be here, and the sumptuous palaces in which these events take place. We're welcoming you all to bring a guest. The more the merrier. We are thrilled that KCWC has weathered COVID far better than most clubs, but it is true that it is the more the merrier, and we'd love to have you all feel free to bring a friend. So with that, I'm going to wish you all a very happy summer. You will be able to read in the President's message on the KCWC website that nobody ever reads, but that I diligently write, what I will be doing this summer. It will be unpacking boxes from many of my past, John and I, past locations. But I will be thinking of all of you. Tennis continues. And I wish you all a very safe, happy, healthy summer, COVID-free. God knows, happy vaccine. And I hope to see you all at the Mayfair Townhouse September 9th. Thank you all so much for tolerating us this year. It's been very hard, but we appreciate the support. And bye-bye.
Oh.